At 92, Willie Nelson shocked fans by finally revealing the 7 artists he couldn't stand the most. Known for his laid-back image and legendary music, even the country icon harbored grudges that few ever suspected. Behind the songs and smiles lies a history of rivalry, disappointment, and blunt honesty. This is the startling list of the artists Willie Nelson openly admits he hated, and the reasons why might surprise you. Kris Kristofferson. Can a single sentence erase 4 decades of friendship? For Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson, it did. These 2 men weren't just collaborators, they were brothers, bound by long tours, late-night songwriting sessions, and shared battles in an industry that often chewed up the honest and the brave. 40 years of loyalty, trust, and mutual respect could not survive one careless line. The fracture happened during a private fundraiser in the mid-2000s. The room was dimly lit, filled with fellow songwriters, a handful of reporters lingering in the back, and whiskey glasses reflecting the stage lights. Willie had just finished performing a subdued, poignant ballad about farm workers and the scars of war, a song meant to speak to conscience, not applause. The air hummed with reflection, respect, and the kind of quiet intensity that only comes when true storytelling takes center stage. But Kris, half-buzzed, perhaps careless with his humor, leaned toward a small cluster of people and said, "Willie's turned into more of a mascot than a musician." Laughter followed from the circle, casual and amused, but Willie heard it. He froze for a long moment, the weight of the words settling over him. Without a word, he walked outside, leaving the room in a sudden, sharp silence. Friends who witnessed it say the look on his face said more than words ever could. That night marked the beginning of a permanent estrangement. The following morning, Willie's assistant quietly canceled their next planned duet. Calls went unanswered. Invitations to collaborate were ignored. When asked about it years later, Willie offered only, "Sometimes words don't fade, they stain." That was all the public would ever hear. Privately, when Kris attempted to reach out through a mutual friend, Willie refused to answer. "You don't get to call me brother after that," he said quietly, his voice heavy with disappointment rather than anger. Waylon Jennings. Of all the figures on Willie Nelson's list of betrayals, the one that cut the deepest wasn't a rival, a showman, or a pop star. It was family. Waylon Jennings, his longtime friend, collaborator, and brother in music, was the one whose cold shoulder left a wound that never fully healed. Together, they had built the outlaw country movement from scratch, defying Nashville norms, playing gritty shows in smoky bars, and forging a sound that was both raw and revolutionary. But behind the camaraderie, jealousy was quietly waiting, ready to rear its head. By the late 1970s, the cracks began to show. Fame, which had once seemed like a shared victory, became a wedge. Waylon resented the way every headline read, "Willie and Waylon," never Waylon and Willie. The subtle slight gnawed at him. Those close to the pair recall Waylon showing up late to recording sessions, drinking harder, and nitpicking credits on songs and albums. He would roll his eyes whenever someone called Willie the face of outlaw country, as if the recognition alone was a personal betrayal. Tensions reached a peak one night in the studio when Waylon exploded, shouting, "You're too stoned to play straight!" Willie, ever the patient soul, just smiled and said nothing, but the memory stayed with him. The final fracture came in the early 1980s during a joint interview. Waylon, half-joking, referred to Willie as a hippie in cowboy boots who forgot where he came from. Reporters laughed, but Willie did not. He walked away quietly after the interview, stopping all calls and visits. The silence between them was deafening, a slow, bitter acknowledgement that some bonds, once broken, could never be mended. When Waylon passed away in 2002, Willie did not attend the funeral. Instead, he sent flowers and a handwritten note that simply read, "See you on the road somewhere." To outsiders, it might have seemed a polite gesture. To those who knew Willie, it was a carefully measured farewell, an admission of grief, an acknowledgement of enduring pain, and a final, private closure. Waylon Jennings had been a brother in every sense, musically, spiritually, but when jealousy and pride intervened, even the strongest bonds could not survive. For Willie, it was a lesson in heartbreak and the fragile nature of loyalty, one that lingered long after the stage lights dimmed and the music faded. Garth Brooks. To fans, Garth Brooks is a hero, a country music icon who turned the genre into a global spectacle, selling out arenas, dazzling with pyrotechnics, and commanding stages like a force of nature. To Willie, however, Brooks was something far darker, a destroyer of authenticity, a man who, in his eyes, had slowly suffocated the very soul of country music. The irony is not lost on those who have spent decades in the industry. Brooks built a financial and cultural empire out of country music, yet Willie swears that empire came at a cost too high to count. While Brooks was performing choreographed feats that seemed ripped from Broadway, Willie was still touring dusty county fairs, cradling trigger and singing songs soaked in hardship and experience. "You can't sell struggle if you've never lived it," Willie reportedly muttered to a bandmate after watching Brooks perform one of his trademark spectacles. Where Brooks offered polish, precision, and spectacle, Willie offered grit, honesty, and lived truth. To him, Brooks' brand of country was a show, not a story, and each firework over a screaming crowd felt like a funeral for the music he loved. The tension between them came to a head in 2004 at the Country Music Hall of Fame. Brooks took the stage and praised Willie as the moral compass of the genre, a gesture captured on camera and lauded by fans as touching and sincere. Backstage, however, the atmosphere was electric with disdain. Willie stared at Brooks unblinking and finally whispered, "Next time, sing it like you mean it." That single sentence spread through the music industry like wildfire, whispered in green rooms, tour buses, and recording studios. It was a declaration. No matter the public narrative, Willie would no longer endorse the man responsible for turning country into a formulaic, polished product. Kid Rock. When Willie Nelson agreed to step into the studio with Kid Rock, most observers expected a chaotic but harmless experiment. A clash of generations, a meeting of musical worlds. What no one foresaw was that the session would erupt into one of the most bitter and unambiguous fallouts of Willie's long career. Willie had entered the studio hoping for music, for collaboration, for the unpredictable spark that comes when two creative forces collide. Kid Rock came looking for a party. It was Nashville around 2008. Kid Rock was deep into his Southern outlaw phase, chasing the grit, swagger, and danger that had always drawn him to the edges of country and rock. He pitched Willie a concept for a rebellious genre-bending anthem, loud, dirty, and unapologetically aggressive. Willie, ever willing to take risks, agreed. He believed in the song, believed in the art, and believed that sometimes chaos could be channeled into brilliance. But from the moment Kid Rock arrived, trouble was evident. He showed up late, carrying a six-pack, blasting his own tracks over the studio speakers, leaving little room for anyone else to contribute. Musicians present later described a session where Kid refused direction, shouting over Willie's vocals, insisting, "Let it be raw," while drowning out the subtlety and soul that Willie brought to every note. Willie, ever patient, tried to rein in the chaos, suggesting a softer arrangement that preserved the heart of the song. Kid laughed, leaning back with a sneer, "Come on, old man, loosen up." That was the breaking point. Willie removed his headphones, stood, and left the studio without a word. The session ended abruptly. The track never saw the light of day. When journalists later asked about the debacle, Willie's response was characteristically succinct. "Some fires are better left unlit." Behind that calm exterior, however, was genuine disgust, a sense that what he had valued, what he had brought to music, had been treated with reckless disrespect. Since that night, Willie has refused every invitation to collaborate with Kid Rock again. To him, it wasn't just about loudness, rebellion, or youth. It was about substance. Kid Rock, in Willie's view, was a voice without depth, an energy without heart. For a man who has tolerated eccentricity, chaos, and even occasional insults, this crossed a line. It was not merely a failed session, it was a lesson in boundaries, artistry, and respect that Willie never forgot. Merle Haggard. When Merle Haggard took a jab at Willie Nelson, it wasn't just another musician talking trash. It was a brother drawing blood. These were two men who had shared buses, motel rooms, and long nights of songwriting. They had built the outlaw country movement together, trading riffs, ideas, and dreams while the rest of Nashville struggled to understand their rebellious sound. But somewhere along the way, Merle forgot that Willie had a memory like steel, and that some lines, once crossed, can't be erased. The first crack came subtly, almost innocuously. Merle began joking in interviews that Willie's cannabis advocacy had reduced him to a mascot rather than a musician. At first, Willie brushed it off with a shrug, but the barbs escalated. One night, on stage, just a few feet away from Willie, Merle leaned into the microphone and said, "Weed's a lazy man's crutch." The crowd roared in laughter. Willie did not. He strummed through the rest of his set in silence and walked straight to his bus, the music of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. That night, something fundamental shifted. Behind the scenes, the tension became undeniable. A joint album the two had quietly planned quietly vanished from the schedule. Willie's manager began politely turning down Merle's calls. Fans, desperate for a reunion of two living legends, asked repeatedly when they might see the pair together again. The answer was never. Willie had made his line clear. Personal respect mattered more than public expectation. Years later, when Merle attempted to make amends, Willie's response was measured, almost mournful. Some things you don't joke about. It was not anger that he carried anymore. It was disappointment, deep and immutable. When Merle passed in 2016, Willie acknowledged his passing with the respect reserved for a fellow musician, calling him one of the greats. But he did not add, "One of my best friends." Friends noticed the omission immediately. That silence spoke volumes. Shania Twain. Willie Nelson never cared for glitter, glamour, or perfectly choreographed spectacles. He built his career on honesty, rough edges, and the raw truth of lived experience. Shania Twain, in his eyes, represented everything he feared country music was becoming. He once joked that her concerts looked more like Las Vegas than Nashville, but there was no real humor in his tone. To Willie, watching Shania take the stage in sequins, leading dances and belting crossover hits was like witnessing a friend sell their soul for sparkle. The tension began in the late 1990s as Twain's crossover hits "Man, I Feel Like a Woman" and "That Don't Impress Me Much" dominated airwaves. Nashville was euphoric. Country music was booming in pop culture. Willie, however, saw a different story. On tour, he told a sound engineer, "Country is supposed to bleed, not sparkle." The comment traveled fast, whispered in studios and backstage corridors, and it became known. Willie Nelson could not stand the pop country wave Twain was leading. Where the industry saw innovation, he saw erosion of authenticity. Where fans heard anthems, he heard formulas. The culmination came at the CMA Awards. Shania walked away with Entertainer of the Year, a milestone met with cheers from the crowd. Willie sat a few rows back, stone-faced. Cameras caught polite clapping, but backstage he muttered to a friend, "Entertainer maybe, but that ain't country." A few minutes later, Twain approached him, smile, handshake, warm greeting. Willie nodded once, curtly, and walked past as if she didn't exist. Many called his behavior arrogance. Willie called it honesty. To him, Shania had traded heartbreak for choreography, life experience for radio formulas, the human soul for spectacle. Toby Keith, Willie Nelson didn't merely dislike Toby Keith. He despised what Toby represented for country music. It wasn't about style, melody, or lyrics. It was about pride, politics, and the soul of a genre Willie had devoted his life to preserving. For him, country music was a language of honesty, heartbreak, and connection, not a platform for slogans or staged patriotism. "A guitar should never wave a flag," Willie once said, a subtle but unmistakable jab at Toby. In Nashville, everyone knew exactly who he meant. Their clash ignited in the early 2000s after Toby released his infamous anthem, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue. The song quickly became a rallying cry for post-9/11 nationalism, but to Willie, it was propaganda masquerading as music. He believed that songs should unite, not divide, heal, not inflame. The tension reached its peak at a veteran benefit show in Austin. Willie had agreed to perform to honor those who served, aiming to bring the crowd together in reflection and respect. Toby went on after him, striding onto the stage, waving flags, shouting slogans, and transforming the concert into a patriotic spectacle that resembled a campaign rally more than a benefit. Willie watched from the wings, his stomach turning. When Toby walked off stage, Willie confronted him quietly but firmly. "You're using music to fight, not to heal." Toby laughed, brushed him off, and walked away. For Willie, that was the point of no return. From that moment forward, he refused to appear at any lineup that included Toby Keith, skipping benefit shows and shared stages alike. Behind the scenes, he dismissed Toby's act as a commercial wrapped in camouflage, a calculated display of bravado over substance. Years later, Toby attempted to make amends through a mutual friend, claiming he meant no harm. Willie never responded. To his closest crew, he remarked, "I've met louder men, but not many emptier ones." It was a verdict, and a permanent rule in Willie's world. If Toby Keith appeared on a poster, Willie Nelson would be conspicuously absent. What others saw as patriotic fervor, Willie saw as a betrayal of the music he had spent a lifetime protecting. To him, Toby had taken a genre built on heart, honesty, and grit, and turned it into a spectacle for flags and applause, a transformation Willie could never forgive. What do you think about the 7 artists that Willie Nelson hates the most? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.